Well, everyone's looking at the US earnings right now for some form of direction. Obviously, everyone wants to see revenue growth at this stage, and so far, it's financial companies that have actually disappointed.
Yeah, I think if you go back a few months, you'll see that, well, in fact, successively, you'll see that the financial companies, in fact, were actually doing quite well, and a lot of them were benefiting, from the huge amount of liquidity that was pumped into the system. I think what we have to look at now is much more closely at the industrial companies, because historically they have shown that industrial production does follow forward orders. And if you look at the graphs of forward orders against industrial production in the States particularly, we're looking at the possibility of a very profound V-shaped recovery. And that is starting to come out loud and clear.
But what about the likes of General Electric, which is in various sectors of the economy?
The parent company of this channel. Yeah, okay, I mean, that has got a few issues of its own. I'm thinking more of actual production companies themselves, rather than industrial holding companies per se. And I think we have to wait for a little bit further down the actual cycle to see what is happening on that front.
Well, speaking of industrial companies, and also just looking here at home, we had SAB releasing a trading update last week. Trading volumes relatively flat, down just under 1%. Looking at those numbers, it's basically what traders had expected.
It was largely in line. There were a couple of disappointments. Funnily enough, China at 12% growth was slightly disappointing compared to what most people were looking for. Europe was a very interesting one. I mean, you saw Russia, where it's got a host of problems of its own. You take Romania. Now, there's a really interesting one. There's a country it's got the 5th largest per capita consumption of beer in the world, after Ireland, number 4. And that took a bit of a knock, from admittedly a very high base in the previous year of comparison. So there were certain patches that really weren't looking that wonderful, and which one would otherwise have thought would have been good. One that came through loud and clear, though, which was very, very good, and which didn't get an awful lot of airtime, I thought, was the rest of Africa. Now there, you're seeing countries like Uganda, Zambia really motoring. I mean, 23% up in Zambia, albeit from a relatively low base. Uganda up 18%. Botswana, interesting, down, what, 47% because of the social alcohol levy that was imposed last year. So, some really interesting things going on in the rest of Africa. And in South Africa, of course, we had a situation where we saw volumes falling back and losing a little bit of market share. That was fascinating ahead of the opening of the new brewery by Heineken stroke Amstel, south of Johannesburg. They're actually producing, they're keeping very quiet about it, and they reckon they'll have stocks ready by December, apparently.
Well, just taking a look at the numbers that we saw coming through from the rest of Africa, we also know competition is growing quite extensively in those regions. Are you not concerned that those numbers are going to be hampered by competition?
No, if you look at SAB and Castel together, they actually are in 36 countries out of the 53 countries in Africa. And it's a very clever joint venture. I mean, SAB is largely, but although not exclusively, in the English-speaking areas. Castel is in the Francophone countries. So yes, there's competition in the form of Diageo and Heineken and whatever, but I think the way that SAB and Castel have done it has been extremely clever. They're positioned well to take on just about any competition that's going to arise, I think.
And in terms of losing market share in South Africa, are you concerned about this new brewery, Heineken and Amstel, now being produced in the country? In terms of that, are you worried about it being a good investment case? Because we know SAB has been one of those favourites for investors.
They've been gearing up for this for quite some time. This isn't new. They know how to handle it in other countries. It's the first time in around about 30 years they've had to contend with a serious global player in their own backyard. So that in itself is going to be fascinating. It's going to be great for the local consumer. I suspect we'll see some fantastic marketing on both sides. We may even see some price competition coming in.
New products probably. I mean, we saw the emergence of Hansa Mars and Gold when Amstel was actually taken off the shelves.
That's right. We saw that, and we've seen about another 4 new products coming in from SAB's global portfolio. It'll be interesting to see if Amstel gives any line extensions there. I've been talking to the company, and they're very tight-lipped about this one. But considering this is the 2nd largest Amstel market in the world after Holland, it'd be very surprising if they don't have some new products.
Pick n Pay out with results later on this week as well. What are you expecting on that front? We know retail sales really disappointed, a contraction of 7% for August. Do you think it's going to be reflected in the food retailers?
I think it's going to be reflected to a certain extent in Pick n Pay. We've had a trading update. We're going to be looking at high single-digit growth out of Pick n Pay. This is the interim figure. It's not the final is only coming out in about April next year. But nevertheless, look, they have been taking a bit of strain. They've been spending a lot of money on repositioning themselves, reinventing themselves in many ways. And I think it's probably only next year when we're going to see the full benefits of a commitment to centralized distribution coming through, for example, their commitment to SAP throughout their organization. In other words, exploiting the benefits of the large amounts of money they've been spending on the company. So no great shakes in these interims, but I think next 6 months and the next year will actually be quite good.
MPC decision later on this week, the final decision for Reserve Bank Governor Tito Mboweni. We know that, as I said, retail sales disappointed. We also have Eskom's call for a 45% tariff increase for the next 3 years each year. What do you think is going to happen on the interest rate front? I know it's always very difficult to tell with Reserve Bank Governor Tito Mboweni because he doesn't really reveal what he's thinking.
That's right. It's going to be, look, I think they'll leave it as it is. I think the figures that are coming through, even if you look at the retail sales figure, and if you look at a quarter-on-quarter progression over the last 3 months, it's saying that there's probably a turnaround, even though that -7% was so horrific. I think very, very few people were expecting that. So he may be persuaded that things are turning around. And you know, the reduction in interest rates that's taken place since December last year must at some point have an impact on consumer spending. So I suspect putting all that together with some of the other high frequency data we've seen will probably persuade him not to decrease rates.